The village lay quiet beneath the weight of dust and sun, its mud walls cracked from years of thirst. Chickens darted between broken pots and dry husks of maize, their clucks the only music in the sweltering silence. Behind the last row of crumbling huts stood a crooked coop, half-eaten by termites, and beside it sat a girl, thin, silent, and always watching. Her name was Zina, but no one called her that anymore. "Waste," her stepmother's voice would ring out from the courtyard. "Waste, come clean the pot. Waste, take these bones to the dogs. No, wait, eat them yourself." It was the name the village carved into her like a scar, Waste. She bore it without protest, without flinching. Not because she believed it, but because no one listened when she spoke. She looked about 15, though truthfully, no one remembered when she'd been born. Her frame was all elbows and knees, her skin the color of dusty mahogany, and her eyes, those eyes, were a quiet storm. But few ever met them directly. It was easier to mock her when you didn't look too long. Each morning, her stepmother and 2 stepsisters would eat fresh millet porridge, groundnut stew, and steaming yams while Zina was handed the crusted remains at the bottom of the pot. Cassava, left too long in the sun, sour and bloated. Chicken bones picked dry, sometimes already licked by the dogs. Soggy bits of leftover plantain with flies still circling. And still she ate. Carefully. Slowly. With her back straight and her eyes lowered. She ate near the coop, crouched on a stone smoothed by years of use, the stench of dung and feathers clinging to her skin like second clothing. Even the village dogs, fat from scraps, were fed before her. Sometimes they waited for her to finish, watching with tilted heads, hoping she'd leave a bit behind. Children laughed at her as they ran past. "Why don't you just eat the dirt, Waste? I saw her chewing on a broomstick yesterday, maybe she thought it was sugar cane." Adults were no better. They called her cursed, slow, a burden too useless even for marriage. The elders said she must be paying for the sins of a dead mother. She was always near, always quiet, always cleaning, but somehow always invisible. No one remembered the last time she smiled. Or spoke. Or cried. When her stepmother's guests came over, Zina was not allowed to be seen. She'd be sent to the back, to scrub pots with sand, or sent into the forest to gather firewood with no shoes. If she returned late, she was whipped. If she returned too early, she was accused of idling. Her world was made of commands and crumbs. Of cracked heels and silence. Of bitter smoke and bitterer stew. Still, she listened. She learned. She knew the sound of hunger before a man opened his mouth. She could smell cruelty in a woman's perfume. She could taste every person's secret in the food they tossed away. She knew whose leftovers burned, and whose were cold as stone. She never forgot a face. Or a word. Or a slap. And though her belly rarely felt full, her mind feasted daily, on memories, on smells, on shame, on pain. They thought her empty, broken, discarded. But in a world that mistook silence for stupidity, Zina waited. She listened. She endured. Because she knew the taste of every man's discard. And one day, she would serve them something they'd never digest. The drums began before the sun rose. By the time the sky blushed with morning light, the village of Mbal was already alive with rhythm and smoke. Today was not an ordinary day. The chief's son, Kamau, was returning after 5 years in the capital, where he'd gone to study and become a man of books and leather shoes. Word had spread fast. He was tall now, handsome, sharp as a thorn and twice as proud. And unmarried. Women rushed to paint their faces with clay and turmeric, to oil their skins until they glistened. Men dragged out old ceremonial cloths and practiced greetings they hadn't used since the last funeral. Even the children were told to behave, though they never did. Zina had been up before the roosters. Her stepmother had pulled her from the straw mat by her ankle. "Get up, Waste. Today you'll cook like your cursed hands were blessed. If anything burns, you'll eat the coal." Zina said nothing. She never did. But her hands moved swiftly, chopping and washing, pounding yam until her arms throbbed, grinding spices into the mortar like she was breaking curses with every twist. She did not look up when the village girls giggled past her. She did not flinch when the smoke from roasting meat burned her eyes. She kept her face steady, calm, but inside her ribs, something strange was stirring, like hunger, but sharper. Like hope's corpse waking. By mid-morning, the courtyards were filled with the perfume of pepper stew, jollof rice, grilled fish, honey cakes, and coconut yam balls. Zena helped carry calabashes to the chief's compound. She was careful with every step. She knew her place. She was the hands behind the feast, never the lips. One of the guests, a young man from another village, saw her struggling to carry a wide wooden platter stacked with steamed goat and banana leaf parcels. "You cooked all this?" he asked, smiling kindly. Zena gave the faintest nod. "Then you must taste it first," he said, lifting a small piece of meat with his fingers and offering it to her. "Even the gods don't eat before the cook." She stared at the meat, stunned. Her lips parted slightly. She hadn't tasted goat in over a year. Not real meat. Not fresh. She could already smell the seasoning, the richness, the tender smoke. Then, crack. The meat flew from his hand, landing in the dust. Her stepmother stood there, lips thin, eyes blazing. "She doesn't eat what belongs to the living," she hissed. "She eats what the dogs forget." The man stammered, unsure what he'd done wrong. Zena did not move. Her eyes stayed low, though her cheek burned from the slap. The dogs came first. Sniffing the dirt, they licked the meat clean. One of them growled at her as if daring her to try and reclaim it. That evening, as the village laughed and danced under the moon, Zena was forgotten. She sat by the soot-blackened fire pit, scraping the bottoms of pots with her fingers. There was little left, burnt bits of rice, meat fat clinging to bone, cold broth spilled on banana leaves. She wrapped some in an old rag and hid them beneath her mat. Hunger had taught her to plan. She did not cry loudly. Only soft, small hiccups escaped her as she crouched near the back wall. Her ribs pushed through her skin. Her hands trembled. The joy of the village was louder than her grief, as it always had been. And then she heard a voice. "You cry quiet. Like a woman who's cried too much already." Zena looked up. An old beggar woman stood near the hut's edge, wrapped in rags so layered they looked like shadows. Her face was lined like tree bark, her eyes clouded like stormed water. Zena did not respond. The old woman limped closer. "I saw what your mother did. I saw what the dogs did. And I saw what you did not do." Zena looked away, ashamed of her hunger. Ashamed of her silence. But the woman crouched down beside her. "Even ash can rise if the fire was holy." Zena blinked. The woman stood and hobbled off, vanishing into the smoke and laughter. Zena sat there a while longer, her fingers still sticky with oil. That night, she didn't sleep. She listened. To the crickets, the drumming, the drunken shouts. And under it all, the whisper of something else, something waiting, something deep, like a drum buried beneath the earth. Her stomach ached, but her mind was full. She did not yet understand what the old woman meant. But her words stayed with her. Even ash can rise if the fire was holy. She repeated it in her head like a secret prayer. And as the moon climbed higher, Zena thought of a feast. A different kind of feast. One where no one danced. One where they would all eat, and remember. The next morning, the sky was bruised with thick clouds, and the village, though quiet, still buzzed with the scent of last night's feast. Empty calabashes lay scattered across courtyards. Drunken laughter had long faded, replaced by the lazy groans of full bellies. But Zena's stomach burned hollow. She had eaten almost nothing. No one noticed when she slipped away, barefoot, carrying nothing but a torn wrapper tied at her waist. Past the drying mats, past the goat pens, past the elder's shrine half swallowed by weeds, she walked until the village became a memory. She followed no path, only the weight of hunger pulling her forward. She stepped into the forest like a whisper. The trees thickened around her. Leaves hissed secrets above her head. The further she walked, the quieter the world became. No birds. No insects. Even her own breathing felt too loud. Her feet brushed dead leaves that didn't crackle. The air was warm, heavy with something strange, spice and smoke, but not of this world. Then she saw it. A tree unlike any she'd known. Towering, silver-barked, its branches twisted into arcs like arms mid-dance. Around its base, arranged in a perfect circle, were bowls. Dozens of them. All steaming. All untouched. They sat on carved wooden stands, some in copper pots, others wrapped in palm leaves folded like blessings. Her nose caught it first, grilled meat glazed in honey and pepper, coconut rice laced with nutmeg, soft yam soaked in palm oil, sugar-fried dumplings, and a scent that made her knees weaken, something like childhood, something like comfort. She blinked. Her body trembled. No one was there. She stepped closer. The bowls did not vanish. The food did not rot. The steam curled upward like ghost breath. She looked around again. Nothing but trees, watching. She knelt by the nearest dish, her fingers shaking. She didn't reach with her hands, not yet. That would be too easy. Too greedy. She looked for a spoon. There it was, a wooden ladle carved with markings she didn't know. She picked it up like it was a sacred tool and dipped it into the golden stew. Just one spoonful. She lifted it slowly, eyes wide, lips parted. The moment it touched her tongue, her vision shattered. Heat exploded in her skull. Light behind her eyelids. She gasped as the forest melted away, replaced by visions sharp as blades. She saw her stepmother choking on a bone that turned to ash in her mouth. Her stepsisters vomiting globs of molten gold that singed their throats. Village men clawing at their bellies, crying for water, but their gourds poured only sand. Women screaming as their hands turned into spoons and could no longer touch their own children. A voice rose, not loud, but vast. Like wind speaking in a cave's deepest belly. What they fed you, they will now taste. Xena dropped the spoon. The ground cracked beneath her knees. Roots twisted up like fingers and wrapped around her ankles. She tried to scream, but her voice stuck like dry porridge. The earth yawned open, and she was pulled down, the bowls vanishing above her as the soil swallowed her whole. Darkness enfolded her, but it was not empty. There were smells. Scents of hunger and memory. Of burnt offerings. Of bitter tears stirred into soup. The air here pulsed with drumbeats that echoed inside her bones. She landed, not on dirt, but on black stone polished smooth. It stretched beneath her like the floor of a palace. Above her hung a sky of fireflies trapped in jars made of bone. The place hummed. She was no longer alone. Figures loomed, tall, robed in shadows stitched with silver thread. Their faces flickered like candlelight, never still. But at the center of them all, seated on a throne carved from famine itself, was a woman. Her skin was dark as overripe fruit, her eyes hollow yet shining, and her presence, immense. The matron of hunger. She did not move, but her voice filled the hall. Child of ash. Mouth of silence. Belly of memory. Do you come to feed, or be fed? Xena couldn't speak. Her knees hit the floor again, this time not from force, but reverence. The matron extended her hand. And it was a bowl. Empty. Waiting. Xena reached out, though her fingers still trembled. Something deep inside her had awakened. Something older than pain. Older than names. This was no longer the world she had known. And she was no longer just the girl by the scrap pot. Xena did not know how long she remained kneeling before the matron of hunger. Time down here did not move like it did above. There was no sun to mark morning, no moon to tell night. Only the flickering glow of jars in the high dark, and the steady hum of something ancient breathing below the stone. When the matron rose, the air bent with her. She walked like hunger itself, elegant, slow, never rushed, yet always arriving before expectation. Her robe trailed behind her, woven from old Saxon wedding veils, prayer cloths and mourning wraps. Every inch of her shimmered with the desperation of those who had once cried out for food, and been denied. "Come," she said, and Xena followed. They moved through halls of black clay and veined walls that pulsed like flesh. Shadows carried platters. Some walked upright, faceless. Others crawled on many legs, their mouths sealed with stitches. The matron's court was a place where hunger had voice, form, appetite. The very air smelled of longing, roasted yams that never cooled, soup spiced with grief, the sweetness of things forever just out of reach. In this realm, food was not just food. It was memory. It was vengeance. It was story, served hot. Xena was brought to the hearth hall, a vast space carved into the ribs of the earth. No firewood burned there, only bone ash and red coals that glowed with ancient fury. Cauldrons stood along the edge, stirred by spirits in silence. Xena was given a simple apron and a blade with no edge but every weight. "Here," the matron said, "you will learn how to cook not with hands, but with heart. The world above feeds the belly. But here, we feed what cannot be filled." Her lessons began. She was taught to hold a breath of rage long enough for it to curdle into broth. To peel guilt like onions, layer by layer, until it made a base thick enough to drown a man's lies. To grind secrets with pestles carved from forgotten oaths. She stirred soups that shimmered like sorrow, baked loaves that bled when sliced, folded dumplings whose insides whispered confessions when bitten. She cooked with no ingredients she could name. One day she folded envy into pancakes and watched them hiss. Another day she plucked shame from a hanging vine and salted it until it wept. There were rules. "You must never taste what you have not earned," the matron warned. "You must never serve what you do not understand. And above all, when you cook from your own pain, eat it alone." Xena trained under 1,000 watchful eyes, none human. Some days she was praised. Other days, the spirits spat out her meals, hissing. But she grew. Her skin grew darker, like the stone beneath her. Her voice returned, low, soft, unhurried. Her hands no longer shook. Her eyes, once dull with hunger, now gleamed like hot coals. Still, one lesson remained. "You've cooked the grief of others," the matron said one day. "Now, cook your own." Xena stood before the hearth, her cauldron waiting. No spirits stirred it. No help came. This was hers alone. She began. She called to mind every slap, every sneer, every half-licked bone thrown her way. She remembered her name, waste, how it rang in the mouths of children, how it echoed off walls. She peeled the laughter of the village off her skin like scales. She diced the silence she swallowed at every insult, every cruel jest, and boiled it until it screamed. She tore shame from her belly. Scraped humiliation from behind her ribs. She stirred until her arms ached, until the broth turned the color of old wounds. The scent rising from it was terrible, sour, sweet, rotting, irresistible. When it was done, the matron appeared, silent. Xena ladled a single bowl for herself. She sat on the cold floor. Alone. She lifted the bowl to her lips. The first sip made her cough, sharp, like betrayal. The second tasted like the night her mother disappeared. The third burned her throat, words she never said. By the fifth, her hands were trembling. Her cheeks were wet. She didn't remember crying. But she finished the bowl. Every drop. And when she set it down, empty, the matron bowed her head once. Xena didn't rise for a long time. But when she did, something in her had changed. She was no longer hungry. And she was no longer afraid to feed. On the morning of the 40th day, long after the village had stopped searching for her, Xena returned. She came on foot, barefoot as always, walking through the haze of dawn with the calm of someone who no longer belonged to the soil that birthed her. But she was not alone. Behind her rolled two large carts, creaking softly with every step. Oxen pulled them, slow and silent, their eyes glassy, their mouths closed tight as if sworn to secrecy. Each cart was covered in thick red cloth, stitched with symbols no one could read. The first to see her was a child drawing in the dirt near the main well. He stared, then ran. "Waste is back," he screamed. Waste returned, with wagons. The name spread like brushfire. Soon, doors creaked open. Heads peeked from windows. Mothers grabbed their children. The braves stepped into the road. They stared, expecting a ghost. But it was Zina, thinner, darker, her hair bound in a cloth dyed like dried blood, her hands clean and folded. She walked through the village center like smoke drifting back to a fire that had gone cold. People whispered, stunned. She went into the forest. No one can last that long. She's cursed. Or maybe she found something in the dark. Her stepmother heard the noise from her courtyard and came rushing out, already shouting. "You have no place here," she snapped. "Go back to the dirt you crawled from." Zina stopped, turned. Her eyes, once downcast, always averted, met her stepmother's full on. They were unblinking. Empty of fear. Full of memory. "I came to feed the village," she said softly. "Everyone." Her stepmother scoffed. "Feed? With what? You never had more than scraps." Zina said nothing more. She raised her hand. The red cloths covering the carts slid off on their own, as if pulled by unseen fingers. Underneath were pots. Dozens of them. Copper, clay, bone-white ceramic, some sealed with wax, others hissing gently with trapped steam. None were smoking. None were cold. Each looked impossibly fresh. And the smell. It hit the village like thunder in summer. Meat roasted in deep spice. Rice steeped in coconut milk and charred ginger. Stews thick with goat, fish, plantain. Dumplings sweet enough to make grown men tear. There were scents that didn't even have names, smells that tugged on old hungers, long buried, smells that made people's mouths water against their will. No one saw her cook it. No one saw her gather wood or stir pots. The chief himself emerged from his hut, eyes narrowing. "Where did this food come from?" he asked. Zina bowed. "From where all hunger comes. And where it returns." He studied her, unsure. "Why offer a feast now? What do you want?" She met his gaze, calm. "I want nothing," she said. "I only wish to serve." Villagers murmured. Some backed away. Others stepped forward, sniffing the air like starved dogs. Her stepmother moved in front of the chief, still trying to control the moment. "You cannot trust this girl," she barked. "She's always been strange. And now she returns with wagons full of lies." Zina didn't even look at her. She walked to one of the pots, lifted the lid herself. A gust of scent spilled out, so thick, so warm, it made the grass tremble. "Eat," she said, turning to them all. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "You fed me scraps. Cold bones. Half-chewed gristle. You named me waste. But I have prepared more than you can swallow." Silence followed. Then, movement. The chief stepped forward. He looked into the pot. He reached for a ladle, scooped up a portion onto a leaf, and tasted it. He stopped. His eyes fluttered, his lips parted. He swallowed slowly, then looked down at the food like he didn't understand his own body's reaction. He scooped again. Others followed. First the brave. Then the greedy. Then everyone. They gathered around the carts with hands outstretched, muttering thanks, some still staring at Zina like she might disappear again. She did not serve them. She simply stood, hands folded, as the village devoured what she had brought. And as the first bites passed their lips, Zina looked toward the distant edge of the forest. The shadows were watching. Waiting. Because the real meal had only just begun. The feast began with joy. Laughter rose from every corner of the village square, bowls passed from hand to hand, fingers slick with grease and soup, teeth tearing into spiced meat like wolves set loose after famine. Children danced around the carts, women hummed praise songs as they dipped their fingers into buttery yam stew, and even the chief, usually stiff and measured, chuckled with a full mouth and let his fine robe stain with sauce. The scents were overwhelming. The aroma shifted with each breath, first roasted plantain sweetened with honey, then peppered fish so rich it tingled the nostrils, then a tangy meat so tender it melted before the teeth could meet. People ate as though they had never been fed before, as though they feared the food might vanish if not devoured quickly. Some wept as they swallowed. Some moaned with delight. But then, the air began to change. The first sign was subtle. A boy, no older than 10, who had grabbed 2 dumplings too many, suddenly clutched his throat. He doubled over, his eyes bulging. His father reached to help him, then froze, his face twisting in confusion. From the boy's mouth spilled not vomit, but thin white feathers. Soft at first, then soaked in a strange black ooze. The father gasped, stepping back in horror. Then, the butcher, big, loud-mouthed, the one who used to beat Zina for standing too near his stall, fell to his knees. He clutched his belly and heaved. What he expelled were not the remains of food, but words. Actual words. They came out shaped like thorns, covered in slime, sharp and bloody. The insults he had hurled at Zina over the years poured out of his throat, useless, dog, trash, each one louder, more jagged than the last. He tried to stop, but the thorns kept coming, ripping at his throat. A woman screamed. She had once led the chorus of gossip about Zina, laughing at her ragged clothes, mocking her silence. Now she gripped her mouth, her tongue swollen and red, blistering before their eyes. Each time she opened her lips to cry for help, fire danced from her mouth, not flames, but sound, echoes of her own cruel laughter twisted into screams. Her words came back to her as burns. Panic spread like oil to flame. One by one, the villagers who had eaten began to suffer. The potter's daughter, who once tripped Zina in front of her suitors and poured palm wine on her head, began to sob uncontrollably. She stumbled through the crowd, her arms raised as if fending off invisible blows. No one touched her, yet bruises bloomed across her skin, green, purple, red. Marks of every humiliation she had delivered were returned to her flesh. Then came the stepmother. At first, she stood smug, arms crossed, watching the village writhe. "See what you've done," she shouted at Zina. "You've cursed the whole village." But her voice cracked mid-word. Her eyes went wide. She dropped to her knees, clawing at her throat. A low, wet sound emerged, then a hiss. From her mouth poured roaches. Slick, black, skittering things, dozens of them, scrambling over her lips, her cheeks, her chin. She screamed, but more came, her mouth a dark well of filth. Her daughters tried to run, but their feet stuck to the ground. When they looked down, their shoes had melted into puddles of shame, and the earth whispered every lie they had ever told about Zina back at them. Now the air was thick with moaning, with shrieks, with choking. The food hadn't just filled their stomachs. It had pulled out their sins, seasoned them, and served them back, dish by dish. The chief rose to his feet, shaking. "What is this?" he bellowed, pointing at Zina. "What witchery is this?" But his lips trembled as he said it. He remembered, suddenly, how he had once passed her on the road and told his guards not to give her water. How he had laughed when someone called her the shame behind the stew pot. His hands began to bleed. The lines in his palm split open, and from them oozed thick salt, the salt of every selfish meal he had eaten while Zina starved nearby. Zina said nothing. She stood still in the middle of the square, untouched. Her eyes scanned the crowd not with anger, but with recognition. Like a chef watching guests taste a long-prepared dish. Villagers stumbled toward her. "Please, undo this," one woman gasped, her breath sour with guilt. "I didn't mean it," another sobbed. "I only said what others were saying. I was just a child," someone else cried. "We didn't know." Zina finally spoke. "You knew." Her voice was steady, not loud. but it carried through the square like wind through a hollow gourd. You knew when I was hungry. You knew when you laughed. You knew when you passed the bones to the dogs before me. You knew when you called me waste. They tried to crawl toward her, to plead, to explain. But the ground beneath them softened, turned to thick, black mud that held their hands and feet. Then the truth arrived like lightning. It came in a wave, a shared vision, everyone who had eaten saw it. A single moment. Xena, not at a fire, not lifting a pot, not touching spice or meat. Just standing. Watching. They had assumed she had cooked. But the food had come from somewhere else. From beneath the earth. From pain. From memory. From everything they had poured into her, scraped onto her plate, whispered behind her back, hurled at her in front of others. The feast had been theirs all along. They had cooked it. Their cruelty had seasoned it. Their sins had baked it. She had only served what they gave her. Now, they tasted themselves. And found they could not swallow. Some fainted. Some ran. Some clawed at their tongues, their eyes, their chests. But the taste stayed. The taste of who they truly were. And Xena? Xena turned and walked away from them all. Not hurried. Not proud. Just finished. Smoke trailed after her, curling from the pots as if following its mistress. It drifted through the village, into the huts, over the wells, past the shrines, lingering like a curse that had found its home. And from that day on, no one in the village called her waste again. Because now, they knew what waste tasted like. The sun had not yet risen, but the village was already drenched in silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that follows after something has snapped. After screams have run dry and no one dares ask if it's over. The feast lay in ruins. Pots broken, food spilled, mouths shut by dread. Those who had eaten too much now lay curled on the ground, trembling, whispering to things no one else could see. Some had clawed at their own bellies in the night, screaming for release. Others had run, fleeing into the forest as if distance might free them from the taste still coating their tongues. And then came the cold. It swept through the village not like wind, but like absence. The birds stopped singing. Even the dogs went quiet, their ears low, tails tucked. And from the stillness rose a figure. She was not tall, yet seemed to stand above the huts. Her face shifted like heat over stone, old, young, beautiful, ruined, all at once. Her robes flowed like famine-made cloth, stitched with dried herbs and braided hunger. Her feet made no sound as she moved. But those who had wronged Xena felt her before they saw her. The matron of hunger. She did not appear to all. Only the guilty. To the butcher, she appeared as his dead mother, mouth sewn shut, eyes weeping stew. He collapsed, screaming for forgiveness. To the gossipy weaver, she appeared in the form of her own daughter, mouth full of ash, begging her to taste her words. The woman fainted, struck down by visions of her own laughter biting back. To the chief, she stood as a mirror. But in the reflection, his regal robes were made of skins, stitched from those he let starve. His crown was a ring of broken spoons. The matron spoke, her voice woven through every crack in every hut. What you consume, consumes you. What you waste, remembers. Some villagers fled again, deeper into the trees. One man threw himself into the river. Another began to dig at the base of a baobab, muttering, "If I bury my tongue, maybe the fire won't find it." But not all ran. A few dropped to their knees. The young father who once gave Xena a broken calabash came forward. He wept, not for his pain, but hers. "I should have seen you," he whispered. "I should have fed you." An elder stepped out with his walking stick, lowered his head, and said, "We failed our own breath." The matron turned to Xena, who stood near the well. She had not spoken since the feast ended. She had not cried, nor laughed. Her work was done. She wore a plain brown wrap, the same color as the earth. Her hair was tied back with a strip of cloth bearing one symbol, a spoon crossed by flame. She nodded once to the matron. And the matron, satisfied, vanished like hunger after a fast, gone, but never forgotten. Xena walked through the stunned village. Past the house where she'd once been slapped for picking fallen fruit. Past the courtyard where the girls had poured wash water on her head. Past the tree where she'd been tied for returning from the market with too little change. No one stopped her. No one dared. She reached her old hut, the one by the chicken coop, now cracked and nearly sunken into the ground. The door creaked. The smell of old smoke still clung to its beams. There, in the corner where she'd once crouched to eat bones and burnt cassava, sat the scrap pot. It was no longer filled with rot. It shimmered. Overflowing with pearls, each one smooth, gleaming, iridescent, the size of a fingertip. They pulsed gently, as if breathing. There were hundreds. Thousands. Enough to make a queen weep. She did not touch them. She only looked. Behind her, a child approached, small, barefoot, with wide, uncertain eyes. The girl clutched a cracked wooden doll, its face long faded. Xena turned. It was the one child who had never laughed when others mocked her. The girl who once shared half a boiled yam behind the granary, whispering, "Don't tell Mama." Xena knelt. She reached into the pot, picked up a single pearl, and placed it in the girl's tiny hand. The child stared, speechless. Xena said, "Only the hungry know what it means to feed others." Then she rose, and left the pot behind. It would remain there, long after the hut crumbled. And over time, the village changed. Some rebuilt. Some left. Some never recovered from what they had tasted. But children were fed first now. Widows received the choicest meat. Orphans sat near the fire. And before any meal, they whispered a new prayer, not to the gods of sky or river, but to the matron of hunger. And to the girl who once ate with the dogs. Who fed them all a truth they could never forget. No one saw Xena leave. One morning, her hut stood open, the scrap pot glinting faintly in the soft light. Her wrapper lay folded at the foot of the mat, and a single clay spoon balanced across its center, untouched by dust or time. Chickens pecked near the doorway, but none dared step inside. Her footprints, pressed into the soft dirt, led east, and then vanished. They searched, half-heartedly. No one dared call her name. The silence she left behind was not emptiness, it was judgment. Seasons passed. Rains returned. Children were born and grew. The village slowly healed, though its laughter became quieter, more cautious. Food was shared more freely. Elders spoke with gentler voices. Yet no one forgot the feast. No one forgot the taste of their own cruelty, served hot by a girl they once named Waste. But that was not the end of her. Far from Ba, in villages tucked behind cracked hills or beneath wind-carved cliffs, stories began to spread. In the weeks before a drought, when wells sang dry and cassava withered in the soil, a stranger sometimes arrived, a woman with wrapped hair and steady eyes, walking alone, a clay pot balanced on her head. She would sit beneath a tree or beside a broken hut, unwrap her pot, and ladle food to whoever came barefoot, with hunger in their eyes. The stew was thick, the bread warm, the meat soft enough for even toothless mouths. Mothers cried. Children smiled with eyes wide, bellies swelling with comfort. The pot never emptied. No matter how many came, no matter how long she served, the food remained, always hot, always full. But there were rules. She never served the rich. If a man approached in gold-threaded robes, she looked away. If a merchant offered coins or cattle for just a taste, she turned her back. If a chief sent servants to summon her, none returned. Her food was for the forgotten. Her feast was for the starved, of body and of spirit. And always, she left at dawn. No goodbye, no warning. Just smoke rising from the place where the pot had stood, and a silence that filled the trees for days after. They gave her names. The widow's daughter. The smoke that feeds. she who stirs with no spoon. But mostly, they called her the one who serves now. A proverb grew from her legend, spoken in hushed tones around fires and under grinding stones. Never call a girl waste, she may feed you a truth you can't digest. Years later, when the world had grown harsher and crueler, a man wandered across a dried plain, his robe torn, his skin burned from sun and shame. His face was lined with regret, though it still bore the bones of once great beauty. He was the chief's son, Kamau, no longer a prince, just a man lost in a land that had outgrown him. He had wandered many roads, eaten many bitter roots, begged water from those he once turned away. His hands were blistered from work, his pride now hollow. One evening, as the sky bled orange, he saw a tree standing alone in the dust. Beneath it sat a pot, large, red clay, steaming gently despite the dry wind. A wooden bowl rested beside it, carved with a single symbol, a spoon crossed by flame. No one was there. Kamau dropped to his knees. He did not speak at first. He only bowed his head, the smell of stew flooding his throat with memories. Then, with shaking hands, he scooped a portion into the bowl and ate. The first bite burned his mouth, not from spice, but from sorrow. The second made his eyes water, the taste was too honest. The third stopped him. He set the bowl down and wept, quietly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I laughed at her. I turned away. I saw, I knew, and I did nothing." The pot hissed gently, as if exhaling. A curl of smoke rose into the air, dancing before him. It twisted into the shape of a girl with a bowed head. The smoke spoke. "Only if you starve first." Then the wind took it. Kamau sat alone under the tree until the stars came. He did not eat again that night. But he was fed.